Okay, so without further ado, the floor is yours, Victor.
Okay, so thank you. Excuse me. I've sent you the 3 studies, but then I decided to send you what I think about brain and languages, and I sent you that presentation. That presentation was the beginning, kind of the beginning of my studies on the subject, because by the time I did the first version of that presentation, I was working at a rehabilitation hospital, and we had all kinds of patients with neurology diseases, central neurology diseases, and others. And we had regular sessions. And one of these days, a colleague of ours told us how she had studying language and the brain. She had studied. We have a great amount of analphabets in Brazil. What did she do? She picked a number of voluntaries. She started teaching those voluntaries the language, which was the first language. And periodically, she would do a brain scan, nuclear magnetic resonance. So with that, she concluded that brain activates language activates various parts of the brain, which is now studied as neuroplasticity. So that's about the time when I knew the HYPIA guys, and I was already a polyglot. And that day I asked her, could language studying be considered a brain stimulating activity? Of course. Could brain learning be considered as a prevention of dementia? Of course. So then I gathered her evidence, and from time to time I do some research of mine and add up to that presentation. And I have presented this 1, 2, 3, 5. It's more or less the same presentation. I put links to the evidence in every slide, so that people can check the evidence.
Do you have a presentation that you would like to share, or should we?
That's the presentation I sent on WhatsApp, but we can review that. But basically, it's that. I wouldn't. If I would present here, I would take more than the 15 minutes.
Yeah, sure. Yes, but better to stick to the 15 minutes. Okay, great.
Yeah.
So
basically, that's a summary of my presentation.
Yeah.
There's evidence. We have evidence that language is brain training. Music learning is much the same, and it can be used to prevent up to 4 or 5 years of dementia. And also we have evidence that children do have a better opportunity of learning, but adults can learn language easily too. That's the sum of the presentation. And then we came, and when I knew the presentation, and when the group, I suggested brain and language, because I had some experience, some knowledge of that, not direct experience. I have my own experiences as a language learner, let's say, but no neurologist experience. But then we chose as a theme brain and language learning. And somebody in the group asked some questions about the children learning other subjects, so that I decided to do a very, very broad literature search, and I was astounding of about how many language research has been done. That's the first time first feedback I gave in the group, and then we decided to do 3 studies.
Out of those, we selected 3, right?
Yeah,
would you like to
3.
summarize those 3 before going to the debate?
So that's the introduction. The first study is I want to talk about very technical stuff. First study is an experimental study, and it's when it comes to it, it's rather simple. They studied a group of multilingual kids versus bilingual versus no bilingual kids. They did some tests in the brain which show activity associated to learning, and they did some psychological tests. One test is attention, like focusing in one only subject, and the other tests are executive tests, like what you do. Something likely to the tests we do in Brazil for the people who are to drive. Let's say if you have a minimal neurological ability to drive with attention. It's much the same tests we do here. What about focus? Focus is, what did they want with focus? Focus is, when I'm speaking in English, I have to defocus all the other languages. Otherwise, I will speak a blood speak with many languages. That's focus. And what about attention? Attention is, I have to be attentive to all the objects because, say, if something falls, I have to catch it. Like when I'm driving, if a car comes from the left of the right, I have to take appropriate measures. They concluded that both reactions are enhanced in bilinguals. And they did also a variation of the old marshmallow test, like this. You give a marshmallow for a kid and tell him, that's not exact, but not the exact test they did, but that's about the same thing. You give a kid a marshmallow and say, if you wait 30 minutes, you give one 2. If you eat one, you have only 1. And that was similar between 2 groups.
Give me 1 second. I'm going to change the camera because it froze. So you're saying that both in focus and attention, it has been proved that both improve in the case of bilinguals versus... Yeah,
and kind of a test for anticipating or controlling desire did the same among the 2 groups. That's the essence of that study. Methodology study, I studied in, generally I find it's good. It's not now to discuss every methodology.
Okay.
But the second study speaks about, the second and third study are two like summaries they summarize all the studies. Fails the word here. So the second study speaks about plasticity, areas of the brain, all that is stimulated by language learning, and it's according to all I know, everything is all right. Just expanded the knowledge. And he shows some more centers of the brain. Language learning stimulates many areas of the brain. And if you look at the brain from that side of point of view, like you split it in 2, you will see the hippocampus and the limbic system in all, and the corpus callosum, which crisscrosses the neurons from left and from right. Those are still considered the key areas because they are the areas who drive connection. They are also the areas who drive emotion. And they have, limbic system has a potent mechanism of stimulating because it's pleasure. It's sexual pleasure, it's pleasure when you take a chocolate, and it's pleasure when you have an achievement. And all in that study, those two studies actually, is quite like what I feel and quite like what other scientists have concluded about that. Language stimulates everything. And because brain works only with glucose, when you stimulate the areas of the brain, the blood will get into those areas to give the glucose. And also it will result of more and more connections. Language is connections, learning is connections. The more connections you have, the easier is it to give, to have more. And not only the areas, the specific areas of knowledge, of language, of seeing, etc., that are stimulated, grow. All the areas grows because when I'm speaking now, I'm using all of the areas. And the blood is flowing through all, and the connections are being made. But the areas that are not being used directly now, they are being stimulated too. So that's why language, in terms of physiology, stimulates the brain. And also it prevents dementia because some specific areas of the brain that are associated with most dementias, they are stimulated too. And you have, as you train your mind through language, you have cognitive reserve. You enhance this area of the brain, which is the frontal lobe, which is knowledge and behavior. And you enhance the basal ganglia and the other basal stuff, which is coordination. You enhance the cerebellum, which is it has some of the same conclusions and even some of the same bibliography. It's also a review, and it talks about the many ways multilingualism stimulates the brain, and to up to which point learning a language stimulates and makes easy learning another language.
Okay.
He speaks about many interesting stuff. Just I won't totally agree with what he thinks about the genetics, because I'm not so sure about to say there's a genetic type of linguist or a genetic type of multilinguist. I don't truly believe that.
Okay.
But it's something we can do research about. So summarizing all the files, all the studies, I think we have big opportunities for research, and we can do an indirect research because there's many things produced in the area, and eventually we can even do direct research like the first article. It's up to us to make a choice because the field is big and huge.
Okay, great, awesome. So thank you so much, Victor. And as you can see on the screen, we also plan to have questions that may incentivize further debate. Do you have any questions for us? Any questions that you think are important to discuss in the debate that we're going to start now? Victor?
I was reading the please repeat.
Yeah, I'm saying that, as you can see on the screen, after summarizing the readings, we are typically expected to suggest some questions that then we may or may not choose to elaborate on as part of the debate. So do you have any questions that you would like us to discuss? I'm going after Victor response. I'll go with you, Tim. Victor, please.
Okay, I do have a suggestion, and I said you after the Prisma checklist. It's a list which we have available for free in the internet of researchers that conducts us to do systematic research. I suggest we read that document and try to focus on one subject that the group votes about and try to do a systematic research about that.
Okay.
Could be, like, for instance, children and L2 learning. Could be old men and L2 learning. One of the 8 questions I said.
Okay, but do you have a link to that document, Victor?
I sent it in the chat, but I can.
Yeah, could you please?
I believe I can send it here.
Okay, all right. So let me stop sharing the screen, and then I can share that document. Any other questions, Victor?
No, the question is, I don't have questions. The question is where we can begin, because it's very, very wide. The big question is where to begin.
Okay. All right, Tim?
Yes, thank you very much, Victor. I hope you don't mind me asking a very wide question. You talked about the effects of sort of language on dementia, for instance. Now, if you were to compare people who have learned languages to people who haven't learned languages, but who have received another form of mental stimulation. So I'm very ignorant about the whole area, but I guess that there may be other studies out there that say, well, if you use your mind in another way, which is also stimulatory, that may have also protective effects against sort of dementia. So I'm just wondering how you can say that it's the linguistic effect that's having this effect, and maybe it's just that the people who are speaking languages are getting more stimulation in general. Again, forgive me, it's a very wide question and a very naive question, but I'm just wondering how one can rule out other sources of stimulation on the brain.
Okay, just one thing before Victor answers. So that's a very interesting question, the cause and effect, right? How do you isolate the cause and the effect here? But before we proceed with the debate, I noticed that we have approximately 9 members, right? And Usman will leave soon, so we'll have 8 members. Do you prefer we all have a debate with 8 people in the same room, or would you rather have 2 breakout rooms with 4 people in each room? What do people think? For debate purposes.
Both are okay to me.
Both are okay, Anja?
Also, for me also.
Okay, but yes, do you have a preference?
Maybe 1 if we are. That's still not so many of us.
Okay, all right. Usman said.
Oh, wait. I think we can do with 8 people.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So we'll do it with 1 room. Okay. So then let's just start with Timothy's question, right, Victor?
Okay. it's not a naive question. In fact, it's a very intelligent question. It's perhaps the question. In all my research, in all the studies I have read, mainly they use musical instrument and language against a group who doesn't do those two things.
Mhm.
And when you compare, it's very, very difficult to do that kind of research. I do a parenthesis. The best kind of research is randomized, controlled studies, which is you make group A, you make group B, and you give them some vaccine or some medicaments, etc., and you wait to 10 months, 1 month, 1 year, etc., and you do the effects and you do statistics. But for randomized, blind controlled, the people doesn't know. You don't know if you're in group A or group B. The physicians don't know if you are in group A and group B. This is the best evidence. We can't have this best evidence in language, because how can you say you want to learn, you will learn, and randomize these people? So the evidence would never reach that level of evidence. But most research compares one group with another. And what has been done up to now that I know is compare musical language and no musical, no language training versus dementia. Yeah. And so they study these people, and sometimes the study goes backwards like this. He observes the people who are old and checks if they were or not trained in language, for instance, which is not so good evidence. But that's all the evidence we can have up to now. Mm-hmm. And okay. Of course, there might be confounding aspects, like kind of language, what language, which language, or if the people had or had not some other training, okay? But mainly the evidence points out that language and musical training in an average represents 4 to 5 years of economy of reserve, because studying language gives you a cognitive reserve. So you have more knowledge, I would say, more cognitive in your mind as a reserve. And when dementia comes up, you have a reserve. That's there.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great, Victor. Usman wants to intervene.
Thank you. Timothy, I thought that was an excellent question. Victor, thank you for that response. I wonder how many of us in this chat play musical instruments, because this isolating both effects is an interesting. So Timothy does, I do. Anybody else? Anya, Carlos. So Deborah, you do. So that's the majority here do. We wouldn't be able to isolate the impact in the prolonging the onset of dementia. It's not like you get rid of dementia, it's just that the prolong the onset because of what Victor described as the cognitive reserve. So I practice a musical instrument every 3 days at least, just about as much as I practice a foreign language. So it's something for us to think about, is our HYPIA members, us as a community, just really good at building up our strategic reserves for the end times. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Usman. Does anyone want to answer that question? Yeah. Anja?
Yes,
Once Anja had his hand raised.
So to the question of Timothy, as far as I read and studied, they don't exactly know for sure what kind of effects the language has. Like they just experienced on bilinguals and compare them to monolinguals. So they have some idea what are the effects in the brain of one and another, and they guess that might be because of their language knowledge. But to be honest, a lot of thing happens in our lives, and they might influence the way our brain is structured and everything. And as Usman said, also the music. And they did not put all that into the account. And also the multilingualism. They also studied mostly just bilinguals and not, well, hyperpolyglots or polyglots. And also different languages. Some languages are has a tonality, like Chinese. And it was shown that the languages that people speak, like Chinese, influence the gray matter in the brain. So they have greater grain and even white matter than those who don't speak the tonic languages. So this is again one effect that they did not pay attention to. They just compared the monolinguals to bilinguals. I mean, that's what I wanted to say. Thank you.
That's very interesting indeed. So how discussion of multilingualism gets reduced sometimes to bilingualism, and the difficulty to isolate this linguistic issue. I had a response from Victor, and then we'll go to Jen. All right, Victor?
Okay, thank you. In terms of, just a short, in terms of language, music is another language. So you can say that the fact that music stimulation does the same as language is no contradiction, and it's no side effect, because they stimulate the same areas of brain. You stimulate the same areas of brain by learning an instrument, the same areas of brain by learning a language. And there are the tonal languages.
Interesting. Jan, want to participate?
Yes. So when I was also reading all those articles, there was a question in my head, because as we say, we compare bilinguals, even trilinguals, to a random group of people, and try to prove that bilingualism has a very good influence on our brain, and that's great. The question that is here, it was also asked here today, whether it is whether it is language or any other, let's say, brain skill. As we discuss music, it's quite near language, as Victor also said. What about, let's imagine, of course, with babies, that's the language is the only, I don't know if I can say, brain training, such intensive brain training they get. But what about maths? If we could train in maths or physics, something like very scientific science, in this like metaphor, let's say, it doesn't matter. So for a monolingual who is trained from very early age in this type of brain activity, would there be a difference? And I'm wondering, I was trying to find some research, unfortunately I didn't find anything, whether there is a difference among math savants and not math savants in general, and is there a similarity or difference between math savants and language savants? Is the brain developing somehow similarly, or is there a big difference? What's the influence on things like postponing dementia or problems like this?
Okay, Victor, wanted to answer to that?
Okay, first study was people with 5 years old and in similar training, similar education. So it kinds of compares people in the same developmental stage as to learning, involves maths, etc., all learning for 5-year people. So that's a kind of a good evidence. But the language was the effect, because they compared bilinguals to monolinguals in the same educational events, similar educational events, and they compared the many languages. Of course, the study was had a small sample, but it's something. And then another comment, you need language to communicate science. You need language to do math. So it's kind of difficult to isolate it. You can study, like I study 5, you can do two populations of same level and understand what happens to those two group of people, as long as they do the same kind of learning. Similarly, we could do that with math. We could study math scientists versus non-math scientists, physics scientists versus non-physics scientists. But I didn't search that. I don't know if there are studies about that.
Okay. Now we have Deborah and then Anja. Deborah?
You can hear me, yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to say really that I actually studied a lot of different computer languages. I worked as a software developer for many years, and I used to feel totally unscientifically that the Latin that I learned in school benefited me in going on and learning all those different computer languages. And it just seemed to me like it was a different aspect of language learning. But I don't know if there's been any research looking into people that learn multiple computer languages, if there's any correlation between learning human languages.
Interesting. So how does computer language relate to language learning? And it certainly intersects with maths and other yeah. So Anja, wanted to address?
Yes, I wanted to answer or to Victor what he says, like how the brain develops from the child from the young age until the high school. Like some research shown that children that spoke many languages, more languages than one, they had advantages not just in brain structures, like physically, that they could prove it, but also they pay attention better. They wanted to know the world better than those who were just monolinguals. They pay attention more to the world than those who didn't. So this was an advantage as a young age. But then I think the studies in Germany or some German-speaking countries, they proved that in high school, the monolinguals had advantage than those who spoke many languages. So I guess that has to be some problem with school system, that they, I don't know, focus, I guess, just in one language where you have to be on a certain level and doesn't matter so much, right, how many languages you speak. So again, what does the school do with children that first they are genius, like when they speak many languages as in kindergarten, but then they go to the high school and that happens to them, that they are the same as monolinguals or even lower with in the grades. I mean, that's what I wanted to say.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point, and in fact, that's what happens with code switching and translanguaging. Like there's a certain stigmatization of the multilingual in that the school system expects from the multilingual speaker to be the sum of two monolingual speakers, and punishes that student when that is not the case. And so, yeah, definitely how the school grades is also important. Ruben was next.
How can you raise the hand?
Sorry, Matthias?
How can you raise the hand?
Oh, you didn't know how to raise the hand. I think if you go to
reactions.
Okay.
So we'll go with Ruben and then Matthias. Ruben.
Yeah, I just want to comment about the first study, which is really interesting, about the methodology of evaluate and observe 62 children in the age of 5 years, which were mono and bilingual, because I have also a son in the same age, which is trilingual, and is now currently in the kindergarten in Germany. And it's quite interesting to observe, because I try also to keep an eye on how he reacts and to some actions. And from the point that learning additional languages maybe is a disadvantage for the children, I'm not agree with that point. At the beginning, I was really scared about the education, how to teach, for example, your son a different language. So in that case, the way we proceed is the mother speak with the children, with the son in one language, the father in another language, and he learned additional another language. And so he's the way, and the child knows that when he speaks with one person, he always speaks the same language. It's really important not to mix. This is also a question we discuss with some experienced people, to don't mix. So if you always speak your son in one language, do it, because he knows that. And if you mix the languages, he will have some conflictions or some disappointments. And I think this is very important to create routines, because children in the age of 4 years old, they learn routines. And this is, I just want to comment that point.
I think what Ruben said is fascinating, and actually some of the research on translanguaging shows that kids prior to school do not really have this idea of language as a self-contained entity. So they distinguish between routines or interactions with different people rather than languages as we learn them as containers in schooling system. Matthias was next, and then we'll go, yeah, Matthias was next, and then Anja. Matthias?
I will be very briefly, Carlitos. Basically, I casually exposed in the last Polyglot Conference Global about the relations between natural languages, programming languages, and math. When you talk about the routines, well, precisely a given set of sentences written or exposed in a certain or in a given order, a given set of sentences, phrases, set phrases in, and so on. There are there's a set of functions and routines that we easily decode as a programming language. In that sense, within our brain, when we talk about, for example, in object-oriented programming, when we have substantive, we have objects. That objects have attributes, and that object performs functions, and that object responds to events. Well, the objects are nouns. The properties or attributes are adjectives, and the functions that perform the functions or methods are verbs, and the events or circumstances are adverbs. That's only an example of why in different programming paradigms we can represent the same structure as a natural language. Well, those internal structures, we do it in our brain almost instinctively. We need to expose to the language as much as possible, as early as possible, in order to keep training the plasticity. Even though it's shown that the mere exposure to the language, even though listening some basic speech at an early age, it is shown that despite you understand only half of this, never mind, no matter what. The point is, as much exposure you have, you are beginning to training your neural plasticity in order to begin learning, in order to predispose you to learn languages at an early age. Just that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you, Matthias. That's really interesting. Like there is a grammar to programming languages, right? Does that mean that these are entirely equivalent or interchangeable for so-called natural languages? That's another question. Anja was next, right?
Yes, so I wanted to ask to Ruben's conclusion about having children and raise them as multilingual in multilingual environment. I don't have my own children, but I studied quite into profound how what are the techniques and how to raise a child as multilingual. Mostly, I listened to the discussions during Sinkot or Tetsu, and two Russians who raised their children as multilingual. So mostly they mention Opa-Ola technique, which is one person, one language, and another one that is like time and place. This is what Simcot was telling about. With the last one, having just certain time and place means just one parent took the child to a walk or something, and then they spoke for a certain amount of time in that language that the parent chose. So he said that when his daughter was young, that she was mixing the languages at the beginning, but then now she speaks perfectly 5 languages. While another idea about Opa-Ola technique when one person speaks with a child has some advantages and disadvantages. So disadvantage is this, that child most of the time, especially at the young age, spends with his mother. So if if one person speaks to a child in one language and another in another, they speak mostly with their mothers or grandmothers, which means those languages will be the strongest. This is what happened to the Tetsu example. So I was thinking about how to unite those different techniques so that the children can still gain as much as they can, which was maybe speaking with the same person as the Bela Devietkina, as it was shown in Bela Devietkina and Olga, the young children, hyper polyglots. I think Bela speaks nowadays 8 languages. She's maybe 7 years old. She speaks 7 languages since she was 4, like fluently. And like her pronunciation is perfect. She can even read in those languages. And I think nowadays they work so that she also assists studies in different languages. So math in one language, science in another, and stuff like that. While mostly, if you live in a certain country, you then have to focus because of the school system just in one language, which again, what happens then after you spoke, I don't know, 7, 13 languages with a child, he or she knows it, but then they go to the school and they have to speak just in one. I mean, just so to open a discussion, and maybe what do you guys think? Or if you raise the children, if you have them in as a hyperpolyglot, as a multilingual, or as a monolingual? Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Anja. So before giving the word to somebody who has children, I think an important question we're not addressing, but it's in the background, is the big elephant in the room, is code switching versus translanguaging. So we're saying, okay, at the beginning, this kid was mixing languages, and after training, he or she stopped mixing languages. Now that presupposes that languages existed prior to that learning process as self-contained autonomous entities. But another way of looking at it is saying, okay, the kid was just using his or her full linguistic repertoire, using all the words and grammatical structure that he or she was familiar with. And then because she was trained in the fact that there are different languages that are separate from each other, eventually that person came to figure it out. But because that person was trained in the supposed existence of languages as separate containers. You see what I mean? And that's the model that school privileges. Like from 10 to 11, they're just German class. And if you use a French word in the German class, then you will be penalized, discounted points in the exam, and so on. So I think an interesting question is, do languages pre-exist children's learning, or are they a cultural product that is reproducing the school system, and because it's in the best interest of a supra institution like the state that seeks to have one language, one country, right? Anybody wants to participate from this? Victor, did you raise your hand?
Oh, yes. Just to tell, we have in Salvador, here in my city, two high schools specialized in presenting that content bilingually. Actually, they present most content in English for Brazilian kids whose parents work abroad. Mm-hmm. And they are very successful schools, and who can pay for a good school wants to pay those schools. So it's kids learning bilingually, and they have a very, very good success. I don't have access to the statistics, but they are very, very desirable by people.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Usman wants to react.
Thank you. What an interesting conversation we're having. And as Carlitos mentioned, does language pre-exist the kids? It made me think about that literature you guys have certainly come across about the universal grammar. My question is anybody up to date on that stuff? Has that been updated? Is that still a myth? I haven't followed up since I read about it. It's supposed to be from the 80s, I believe, Chomsky, right? If anybody has an update on that.
Anybody wants to participate?
Can you maybe say? Can you maybe tell us what is it about, the far as you know it?
The universal grammar hypothesis came from Chomsky as part of his linguistics explorations at MIT in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. And it suggested that there is a set of structures that is universal across languages. And basically children, when they're learning languages, are tapping into that universal structure. So one example of that became prominent was the Nicaraguan Sign Language, where they isolated kids in a foster home in Nicaragua without adults. It was very extreme circumstance, but basically they found that these deaf and mute children had come up with signs that were understood by the community themselves. And so it was an example of a universal grammar existing that without any formal instruction, these deaf and mute kids could communicate effectively with each other. So that became very popular, and this is quite old stuff. So I wondered if anybody had heard about, is this universal grammar still a thing or not? I don't know. So that's it.
Matthias wants to answer?
Well, in that sense, universal grammar doesn't exist as such. However, natural languages share some structures in common that are, I mean, languages share some part of a structure that are common across the languages, but there are not such a universal grammar because I mean, not only the order of components, but also the dependency rules, the concordance rules, and the set of condition. I mean, the set of any given rules varies across every grammar, but there are the only 3 points that there are in common between among all the languages, as well, including but not limited to the programming languages, I exposed casually in the Polyglot Conference Global last year. First of all, an imperative mood. Since the government, since the man is given the power of language, the first thing that the man learned is how to give orders or commands. I mean, the imperative mood of the command, the imperative. Okay, this is the first. The second point is the real mode, is that subset of the sentences or statements written written and narrated in real time, in regardless tense and aspect. Regardless tense aspect good. How the statements are over the timeline and regardless tense aspect good. And the third, the capacity of the ability of nominalize actions, how to assign the results of functions to constants or variables. I mean, the capacity of how to create verbal nouns, verbal adjectives, etc. Well, those three elements are in common with nearly every language, with every language. However, the grammar that govern those rules are way different among our 7,000 languages. And I mean, there are I exposed about the 10 Greenberg indexes. If you want, I can later give my PowerPoint by mail for further researching. But the point is that there's not a universal grammar in the sense of a universal structure, but at least there are 3 elements are in common that can be adapted to every structure, but they are not a structure in common itself.
So thank you, Matthias. Just to add up to that, basically, so there's no universal grammar, though these ideas still have some modicum of currency amongst the formalists, linguists, etc. That doesn't mean that there are not elements that are common to all languages, as Matthias said, whether these are natural, so-called natural languages or programming languages. But on top of that, there is another level. There is the conceptual level that is prior to the linguistic one, what Steve Pinker calls mentalese, which is ontologically prior to those languages, and as such, it is shared as the foundational basis by all languages, whether these are programming or natural. Still, this is not a universal grammar as such.
That natural predisposition is the mentalese that.
Yeah. And so, Victor?
2 points. Point number 1, study 3 shows that, so some evidence that when you learn multiple languages, it becomes easier to learn the grammar and the metalinguistics of the other languages. So that's evidence. And then when you're speaking about men, elder men, I remember, and when I was a kid, I think you do not do such research anymore, but a kid I was at medical school. There was some research using some monkeys or apes. They do not have a phonic apparatus as us, but they thought of their language, hand language, and studied how they reacted. And at some moment or other, they developed a known grammar that was not in the language they had been taught. They kind of developed their own hand sign language grammar. Something very interesting. I don't know the conclusions because I think scientific is not approved. It's not anymore approved, ethically approved to make such research. But they did develop the grammar.
Do you have the link, Victor?
No, it's old stuff. I didn't even. I was at the medical school. I was very young.
Okay.
Try to say it here.
Deborah, wanted to participate?
Yeah, just extending, first of all, what Victor was saying. I don't know where to find it now, but I do remember a study where someone from, I think from the UK, went to India, and they were interested in children, deaf children, developing sign languages. And they were in a situation where they were at a school where children from different parts of India were taken there to be taught sign languages. And in the classroom situation, they were very sort of stilted and quite reluctant to participate, and everything was very sort of slow. And then when they were out in the playground, they were really enthusiastically and energetically signing with each other. And this researcher asked the teacher, what is it that they're talking about or communicating about? They're so excited. And their teacher said, I have no idea. They have developed this signing language between themselves, and they use that in the playground, but we don't know what it is. We're teaching them another official version. But I read that a while ago, so I'm not really sure. But the original question I had was, in the readings, it talked quite a lot about the focus on biliteracy and the importance of biliteracy and how this contributed to more beneficial effects of learning subsequent languages. But I was thinking, to me, this seems like a very sort of Western point of view, because throughout the world, there must be millions of children that grow up in multilingual environments that are not literate and perform perfectly well in those cases. And I don't know if there's been any study on those children looking at their brain function. Is it still enhanced even though they have no literacy?
Interesting question, yeah.
Another interesting question is that
yeah, I was just going to say that there is evidence on cognitive, conceptual ability from people, even adults, that do not speak any language. Not just that they don't have literacy, but they don't speak any language. But that's not exactly the same question Deborah asked there, so I'm mindful of that. Very briefly, Matthias, and then we'll go with Usman.
No, only to say that mentalese is that predisposition that driven us to try to communicate despite, for example, the nonverbal information when I try to communicate in the other, despite having an A1 or A0 language, I want to try to communicate with you in that language. That predisposition or that nonverbal information is driven by mental ease. Just that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, indeed. That's a very good point. Usman?
Thank you, Carlos. Based on the fascinating discussion we're having, I think we have an idea of the perfect study of the field. What would be the perfect study if it were possible? And it's not. It would be, does our competence and our strategic reserve, our cognitive reserve, scale up with the number of languages we learn? Because the study we saw in the literature was bilingual versus monolingual, but does it scale up to 6? Are you really that much smarter? Do we feel really that much smarter? And could we isolate that from other things that are interesting that we do? Because we're hyperstimulated. The more languages we learn, the more we expose ourselves to people, ideas, cultures, and stuff, including movies and so cinema, music, etc. But the perfect study would be if you saw somebody with a poverty of stimulus environment, and yet they stacked up languages up to 6, 7, 8, and you could see that there was a cognitive strategic reserve that scaled. Perhaps there's a diminishing returns to scale, but every incremental language n+1 adds to that. However, that would be the perfect study, and I know it's not possible, but that would be the fascinating question from all this.
Very interesting, Usman. And so just to clarify, when you ask about cognitive improvement, do you mean metalinguistic awareness? What cognitive functions are you thinking about?
Well, I'm not sure, because we've covered many of them. You'd as a community, we could decide what we're trying to measure, but whatever we're trying to measure, does it scale up by learning 2, 3, 4, up to 6, up to 10, whether it's metalinguistic awareness or just things like your cognitive reserve, like the smarter part of it that they continue to talk about ambiguously, whatever that means.
Great, thank you. Victor, wanted to touch up on that or any other question?
Okay, just not another comment. The studies also, those 3 and probably some other, they also evidence that the behavior of the people is affected by the language. Behavior and cognitive behavior is affected by bilingualism or multilingualism. That is, if you learn more languages, you have a different way to think about and to consider what you're learning. That's something to research. I don't know if it has been researched.
Thank you, Victor. Now, Anja and then Ruben.
Yes, I wanted to answer to the Usman's when he was discussing what is the changes that you can notice in the brain of the multilingual or hyperpolyglot brain. So as far as I've researched is that brain of a person who speaks more languages gets adjusted. So mostly when you're learning new language, in the frontal region parts are activated, but then they start to activate the parts of the brain that are backwards. Like in conclusion, when you speak more languages, all brain gets sort of activated, and more the places that are more far away in the brain regions get activated, and well, they grow like because of neuroplasticity, which doesn't happen in monolingual, where that use just always the frontal those structures in the frontal region, where is the decision making and well, and also some lymphatic system, where it's because of the emotions. When they are very emotionally motivated, they learn better. So mostly those structures with monolinguals, but then if you speak more languages, you sort of, when you master it, that brain structures are activated in the backwards. But on the other hand, also the connection in between the regions and in more far away regions are activated and well, get improved and get stronger. So this is one of the advantages if you speak or master even more languages. Also, what it was interesting, I find interesting was that if you speak just one language or that was not so good and another one that was very high, the brain regions were more activated when you speak that not so strong language, which would mean like, which that was very interesting discovery, because you would expect the opposite. Thank you.
Thank you. Very interesting. So how neural connections get activated when you learn different languages and relative to the leveling at which you speak each of those languages. Ruben?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting discussion. I also was wondering about the topic, if the school system is prepared for those kids which are multilingual. What do you think about that? So my opinion, what I see in my environment is that these kids, they need a powerful environment to keep learning, to if they are learning some languages from because of their parents. So do you think that system maybe is outdated? Because I have the feeling that the kids are under challenge. The kids, the children are they need challenges, and this is from one point. And the other question is, do you think there is a correlation between multilingual children and the education of their parents, like parents with a highest degree, like develop kids with well, multilingual kids, or if there is a correlation with that?
Okay, great questions, Ruben. Yes, I think the school system is vastly outdated, as well as the university system, if you ask me. As to the question of the parents, I don't know. I don't really know, but we have people wanting to comment on this. Let's go with Victor, then Jan, then Anya. So, Victor.
Okay, just to add a point to what Anya said, the second study evidences, the evidence is not well 100% established, but I don't know any 100% established evidence on the subject. But they showed that multilinguals kind of have more expression or enhance the brain area in the cerebellum. And the cerebellum is an area associated mostly with unconscious ways of thought, automatic ways of thought. Mm-hmm. So that as you learn a language and you learn orders, it's like you have to liberate some space, and then it's a way to put the knowledge of other languages available, but in another area. It's something interesting.
That's very interesting. The automatization of the connections you draw up onto to speak a language, right? Yeah. Who is next, Jan?
Okay, so when we speak about school system and everything we've covered here, yes, it's outdated. The problem is, in my opinion, that if we want to include what we have like read about and researched and other things, it would be impossible to create even like half perfect school system because of the resources that would be needed. Mm-hmm. And in that, considering this, parents' role would be is very important, because that's parents who have, let's say, most of the time for the children with individual teaching. I can see it when I teach individually students. Yes, I can adapt to the student's needs. Yes, I have a student who starts learning Polish and he's into AD&D and role-playing games. So, you know, one of the first sentences can be, I'm a mystical bowman or something like this, because that's adapted to him or her, but we cannot do it in school system. The only thing, in my opinion, is that if we research it really well, we can squeak it, we can like improve it a little bit. And for example, include the fact that some bilinguals who are bilinguals from home, let's say, learn differently, and maybe it would be possible, especially in cities. I don't know how about, you know, rural areas, to create classes which are, let's say, bilingual designed, especially when there is a minority speaking, I don't know, speaking like a second language at home, but they know the main language of a country. And then we could adapt it. Maybe English is not the first choice then to teach, like start with those two and go up later English, include, I don't know, in a secondary education. Because we have to, if we want to have something really working, we cannot only think about, yeah, it's wrong, but creating perfect system is also impossible. So maybe kind of popularizing this knowledge also among parents would be very useful. So
Yeah.
that's just what I wanted to
I
comment.
think that's a great point. Sometimes the sheer amount of students just makes it impossible to adapt content to the entire diversity of the class. And there are, at university level, there are courses for heritage speakers of a certain language or bilingual speakers, but I don't know so much in schools and high schools. Anja and then Deborah.
Yes, so as you know, I'm from Slovenia, so I know the Slovenian school system. I can't judge for other countries, but I can tell you how it is here. So what I've noticed is, well, Slovenia is a small country surrounded with many different groups, which means it's important that we from primary school already have to speak one or two foreign languages, which mostly are English and German because of Austria. And well, because of Italy, those who live in the border, they also have to speak Italian. What I wanted to say is that what I've noticed is many children in primary school, they are so talented. They even were, they tested those children and they showed as extreme talents and I won't say they were genius, but you know, but when they come to the high school, in Slovenia we call it gymnasia, which is the hardest high school of them all, and from which you have to go into university if you want to be something, to do the bachelor and master. So, you know, to go into that high school, which is the hardest, but then the most intelligent children show so many disadvantages, maybe even repeating the years, which means something has to be wrong with the system if the children that are proven to be talented they don't show their potential when they come to the school. They are not supported. Like those research in Germany, I can say that also in Slovenia would be probably the same. And to answer another question that Ruben, I think, asked about multilingualism and how to, if you can influence it as a parent, I think yes, if the children are raised in the family where their parents are more educated or they speak more languages, also the children that will influence them. And also some of the research that we read suggested that genetics has some strong influence and they would want to research it more, but yet they did not make a lot of research in that sphere. But that indeed the disadvantage of genetics has a very strong impact on the multilingualism in the children and well later in the adults. Well, that is all from my part. Thank you.
Thank you, Anja. I think the gymnasium distinction that you made is also common to German, where the gymnasium is typically hard to get into, but it's typically the path that people choose when they want to go to university later on. Deborah?
Yeah, I was just going to comment from the Welsh school system. There's a big drive in Wales to produce children who are completely bilingual by the time they leave school. So they tend to learn in the two languages. The schools that are primarily teaching in English are not as successful, but the Welsh medium schools are a lot more. And they try and produce in other languages as well, so that they are speaking 3 languages by the time they leave school. But what they've been doing with children then coming from different heritage language backgrounds, there's a school I know of in Cardiff that the children come from, 90% of the children come from homes where they're not speaking English or Welsh at home. And the school realizes they can't really work on the literacy and the language skills in all those different languages. But what they try and do is have an attitude that is positive and encouraging. And they try and encourage the parents to keep up those languages with the children, to read to them in those languages if they can, to increase their knowledge in those languages at home, so that the children are proud of those language backgrounds and they don't feel that it's something that they've got to try and leave behind when they come to school. They see it's something that's acceptable. And that's one step towards helping them.
Very interesting. So how language learning at home complements language learning at school, a little bit in tune with what Jan was saying before. Okay, so right now we just hit the 1 hour mark, so maybe we have time for 1 or 2 more comments. We'll leave it there. Does anybody want to add anything else? Okay, so then that was absolutely perfect. I want to thank you all for keeping your interventions to the maximum of 5 minutes that we agreed on. That was brilliant. And now don't leave yet, because we need to agree on what the next topic is going to be and who is going to be the lead, the presenter, the person who decides what the readings are going to be. And that's the initial presentation on the main points of the readings leading up to the debate and the questions leading up to the debate. So, okay, I have a list of topics, but you can also add topics that you don't see represented in the list that are interesting to you and add them in the chat. Okay, so I'm about to share my screen and then we'll take it from there. Just 1 second. Okay, so that was from the previous meeting. And at the end of that, there you go, next topics. Yeah, okay. So these are some of the options that we have. Just a second, someone wrote something in the chat. Will the meetings be posted somewhere? Yes, on the YouTube channel of HYPIA. You can find them all there. So Usman will upload them. Okay, so these are the topics for our next meetings. So it will be A, we already covered A today, right? So it will be now for the next meeting, spiritual/divine elements in languages. Very interesting. Sanskrit, Hebrew. Teaching approaches, total physical response and crashing. These are 2 techniques. Why locals respond in English when addressing their local language. It's something we've all asked ourselves at some point in our lives.
Erasmus.
Exactly, Erasmus. The use of languages other than English in science. Contrastive analysis in multilingual translations, post-colonial and decolonial linguistics, and you already know who included that topic. Maths and languages, the usual suspect here is Matthias, and then journalism and multilingualism, pretty much the same. So are there any additional topics that you feel will be interesting to discuss as the main topic for our next meeting? If somebody has anything to add on that, they should write the topic now in the chat. Just leave a minute for suggestions and then we'll vote on our topic of preference. Timothy?
Yes, one practical question that may affect my vote. When is the next meeting going to take place? Do you already have a date in mind?
Brilliant question. So our meetings are always the last weekend of the month, which means that it will be either the 28th or the 29th of August. We still need to vote on that. So we'll first choose the topic and then we'll circulate a doodle poll, just like we did for this one.
Yeah.
It will be either the 20th or the 29th.
Yes. Oh, yeah. Just another practical question: are we allowed to vote for our own topics?
Yes, that's what I just said. That if you have your own topic that you will add to the list of topics to be voted on, then just write it on the chat, just like Victor did, saying, for instance.
Oh, yes. Okay. Sorry, I missed that.
No, we have 1 additional minute to do that. So those new questions do not have a letter because I couldn't have foreseen what those new topics would be, but we will add letters. So if the last one was the I, the next one will be J, right? So it could be J, as in DJ, for the topic that Victor just suggested.
By the way, Philip Crowder, a journalist who is recently become a fellow HYPIA member, he speaks 7 languages, and 6 of those 7 languages, Luxembourgish, German, English, French, Spanish, and Portuguese, he broadcasts in all of those 6 languages, and he is interested in being part of a HYPIA scholar.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, so you talk with Usman for further details.
Okay, I'll contact him. Philip is brilliant, by the way. You haven't seen him doing live reporting in 6 languages. It's crazy. Okay, so that's as far as we go. You don't have any other topics to suggest other than the one that Victor said? Okay. All right, so if that's the case,
yeah.
Sorry, Deborah, did you have any additional?
No, thinking aloud.
All right, so let's just vote, okay? Let's just each of us say what our preferred letter is. So the letter for Victor's topic is J, as in DJ, and then the rest of them you have them on the screen. So please just write one letter, preferably, and then if there is any draw, we can further vote, okay? All right, so let's see. Okay, I'll start counting from what Timothy wrote. Okay, so we have one vote: Timothy, Deborah, me, Anja, Johannes. Who else wants to vote? Oopsie. Matthias, did you vote already? Oh yeah, you said H or I. Okay. Okay, H, I, yeah. Okay, it looks like H is the most voted one, right? We already have 4 votes for that, so it's impossible to overturn that, essentially. Okay, so it will be H then, which is math and language. Sorry, math and languages. Okay, great. So now the question is, who wants to lead? Ideally, neither Victor nor me, because we just led the 2 previous sessions, so it should be someone else.
It seems that it's my topic, H.
You want to do that? Anybody else wants to present that? Then it's going to be Matthias. Okay, so and now what we'll do next is to circulate a Google poll to see what time works best for us.
Add a T in next topic.
Sorry?
Please add, don't forget to add a T in next topic in the title.
Yeah. Okay. And then we'll decide the readings. Okay, so we have until 1 week before our next meeting. This means the 21st or the 22nd. You have, Matthias, until the 21st or the 22nd of August to suggest 3 readings and send us the links so we can read them or watch them in advance, okay? And then on the 21st and 22nd, we will also send the doodle poll to decide on the specific time, on either on the 28th or the 29th, okay? Any questions, doubts, concerns? Okay, so thank you so much, everybody. It's been truly a pleasure. I've learned a lot from all of you, and I wish you a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Have a nice weekend. Bye-bye.
Obrigado.